Thank you very much. I'd like to call the meeting to order this morning and acknowledge that we are in Treaty 1 territory, the home and traditional lands of the Anishinaabe, Ojibwe, Inuit, Cree, and Dakota peoples, and in the national homeland of the Red River Métis. Our drinking water comes from Shoal Lake 41st Nation in Treaty 3 territory. My name is Brent McIntyre, and I'll be chairing the hearing this morning. Zooming in on the panel is Michelle Duncan and Lynn Nesbitt. And also zooming in is the assessor, Stephen Lobenstein. Our administrative personnel today is Sally Caulfield. We will be hearing applications for revision of the assessment roll in accordance with the Municipal Assessment Act. The matters for which revision is requested have been described in each application, and we will limit discussion to those matters. The statements that are made at this hearing are sworn testimony, and anyone speaking to the matters must be sworn in. Be advised that comparisons of assessments of properties are not considered evidence of market value by the Board of Revision. The Board of Revision is appointed annually by Council and is independent of it and the City Administration. It makes its decisions on the basis of the evidence provided at this hearing and issues a written order that will be mailed to all parties as soon as possible. Please note that the Board's decisions with respect to an application may be appealed to the Manitoba Municipal Board if the matter pertains to assessed value or classification, or to the Court of King's Bench if the matter pertains to the application of exemptions from taxation. Should you wish to appeal, information on how to do so will be included with the board's order. With respect to the hearing process, I will confirm the points of appeal with your property to be addressed with each applicant following the swearing in. We will then have the assessor's testimony followed by questions that the applicant may have, and then the applicant's testimony followed by questions. Each side will have an opportunity to summarize if they wish. Once all of the evidence about an application has been brought forward, the applicant may leave. The process will repeat for each item on the docket today. The session will close after all the applications have been heard, and the board will deliberate in private and make its decisions. You will receive the board's decision by registered mail as soon as possible. As information, all public hearings are live streamed, recorded, and will be part of the public record. We will be hearing items 1 through 7 on our docket today. Ms. Caulfield, please affirm the assessors and the applicant's testimony. Thank you.
Mr. Chair, please note that item number 5 has been withdrawn.
Item number 5, 1551 Church.
Yes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Mr. Assessor, please state your full name.
Stephen Lobenstein.
You affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth.
I do.
Thank you. Please state your full name. Very well, Brother. Do you affirm that the evidence you're about to give at this hearing will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The first item on the docket today is 499 Madison Street. Are there any preliminary issues on this property, either party?
No.
No, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Stephen, you can proceed with your presentation.
Okay. The roll number is 0700111850. It's 499 Madison Street. It's for the roll year 2024. We have an assessed value at $706,000. For the property description, there's 2 premises in 1 building. We have an effective year of 1956. The zoning is M1, manufacturing light. The land area is 69,941 square feet. The plan area and leasable area is 5,555 square feet for a land to plan of 1.25. So we'll move to my page 2. You can see there was a sale in 2004 for $106,000. I wouldn't say it's really relevant to this appeal. And then that they are compliant. They did send in their mailer in 2020. For this property on my page, we'll go to my page 3 here. We can see some lease comparables. So all these lease comparables are in a similar area. They're in the St. James area of the subject property. Barrie, King Edward, Sargent, St. Matthews, and St. James are all in close proximity to the subject property. You can see the lease starts. They range from 2012 up to 2020. And the lease terms are fairly similar to market, ranging from 2 years all the way up to 10 years. The leasable areas are similar to the subject property in that they range from 3,385 square feet all the way up to 7,156 square feet. And again, the wall areas are fairly similar, maybe except for excluding the Sargent one where it's at 23 feet, but the rest of them range from 12 feet to 18 feet. The effective year built are very similar to the subject property. The subject property was built in 1956. The effective year, these ones have effective years ranging from 1957 all the way up to 1967. So very similar. And of course, these are net rents for the property. And these net rents range from $7.02 a square foot up to $9.71 a square foot. So these are all very good comparables. They're very similar to the subject property in size, wall height, and effective year built. And this is where we move to my page 4, which is the income workup. You can see we've broken it down into 2 premises. The overall rent, or the blended rent, is $7.28 a square foot, which gives us a potential rent when applied to the square footage of $40,396. We're applying a 7% vacancy, 3% expenses to get a net operating income of $34,945. We have a 4.95% capitalization rate in this property, mostly due to its size. It's a smaller property. It doesn't carry as much risk as large properties. And when we capitalize the net operating income at 4.95%, we get our capitalized value of, or our estimated value of $706,000. So if you move to my page 6, you can see our capitalization rate chart. Industrial is the second from the top. You can see that we have the 20th to the 80th percentile ranging from 5.55 to 7.45. So this actually falls out of our 20th to 80th percentile where the majority of cap rates are at 4.95%. That's, again, it's mostly due to its size. A smaller building doesn't carry as much risk. And then including there, we can go to my page 8. So on page 8, you can see where it's located, just off Century, on off St. Matthews, sort of near in the Polo Park area. On my page 8, you can get a look above the property. You can see that it's in close proximity to the other properties around it, which is not uncommon for the St. James area. Page 9, you get another look at my at the overhead look. You can see the how you have access from Madison, and you have a rear access, like a back lane as well, where you can access the property. And on page 10, you can just see at the back lane there, the overhead doors where you can load any supplies or materials that they need for the businesses inside. So page 11 is the income expense mailer. You can see that it is tenanted. It's gross income. So we would not be considering the rents, but we could look at the net operating income, which they've supplied at $28,947. So that's taking account all the expenses. Moving further down, you can see that they have the 2 tenants in there taking up the majority of the space, and they had lease starts in 2019 and 2020. So we feel, I feel the value of $706,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carrie, any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I've got a few. Mr. Laubenstein, could we just initially turn to your page 4? So the if I'm understanding right, correct me if I'm wrong, but these are model-driven parameters right from the potential rent all the way through to the cap rate. Is that a fair statement?
That's a fair statement, yes.
Okay. Now, with respect to the capitalization rate, and I know you alluded to it a couple of times, the 4.95%, and you're forthright on this, the 4.95% falls outside of the department's own chart for industrial properties that's starting at 5.55%. I heard that correctly?
Yeah, that's correct. I spoke to that, saying that the majority of properties fall between that 4.9 or the 5.5% and the sorry, just give me a sec here. And the 7.45%.
Right, okay. So now you mentioned size, but to be clear, as far as what the department's equipped you with for evidence on cap rates, the only evidence that the department's given you for the purposes of this hearing is the chart on your page 6, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Now, just in terms of a couple of the theoretical questions, we can agree that a capitalization rate is intended to be a measure of the risk of the property when an investor is valuing it?
That's the idea of it, yes.
Okay. Now, if we turn to your page 1, and again, I'm fully cognizant of your comment on the size. Not sure I agree with that premise, but the factors, when one looks at risk, could we agree that one of the risk factors might be the age of the property and the condition of the property due to that age?
Yeah, I would agree.
And this property was built in the 54, I guess, with an effective age of 56. So not much difference in there. It is an older building then, correct?
I won't disagree with that, but you can see in my comparables, I've supplied older buildings as well. It's
absolutely
in this area, there's a lot of older stock.
Yep, totally agree. In fact, we're gonna have, I think, 3 or 4 of those very kind of properties, including this one. The wall height for these industrial type uses, we can agree the wall height would be another factor in value, correct?
Yeah, that when I was talking about, I would say that's more representative in the rent than the cap rate, but as you can see, for my comparables as well, other than the Sargent one I spoke to, they're all 12, 14, 16, 18 feet. So again, these older properties have lower wall heights.
I guess I'd suggest, Mr. Lovenstein, that in fact, the wall height, and I agree with you, that would be to some extent reflected in the rent, but would also be reflected by an investor in terms of his analysis of the risk, in that the 12-foot wall height is obviously virtually obsolete by today's industrial standards. Do you think that's a fair statement?
So I don't disagree that they're building newer buildings are definitely building higher, but the old buildings still exist. They are sold in the market, they are being purchased in the market. So I don't always believe that wall height has a huge effect on whether a building will sell or not.
Okay, fair enough. We'll agree to disagree on that one. Now, with respect to, of course, with these industrial properties, land to building ratio, could we agree that that is also a factor when one considers the ability of investors to attract tenants at the property?
Yeah, I wouldn't disagree with that. Land to building ratio is important. It's particularly important for, I would say, heavy manufacturing, where they can store a lot of their materials on the property and even do manufacturing outdoors. In this situation, when you have a property like this in the St. James area, as I alluded to, a lot of the buildings are very close. It's a very built up area. So although land to building ratio is important, I would say it's not as important in this area.
I'd suggest could we agree that certainly the ability for loading and parking, no matter who's in the property, whether it's manufacturing or warehousing, you've still got people in the property conducting some kind of business, and parking and loading would definitely be a requirement in every case. Would that be a fair statement?
Yeah, that's a fair statement.
And in this case, the land to building ratio is 1.25, exceptionally low. We can agree on that?
I would agree.
Okay. Could we turn briefly, and this, you may not have been aware of this, so I'm going to ask the question, but if you don't know, that's fine. Could we turn briefly to your page 9? So on page 9, you've got the aerial shots of the building. So this is the building. It's labeled as it's labeled as 499 towards right in the front of Madison Street. So that's the subject, correct?
Correct.
Were you aware that the parking lot to the immediate north of that property, half of that lot is dedicated to the tenants of this building?
I mean, I guess that's the prerogative of the building owner to do that.
Certainly, and a function of the fact that there's no parking on site, correct?
It looks like there's only street parking. That's correct.
Right. And that lot to the immediate north, you'd agree that's a separately assessed parcel with its own value for 2024, correct?
That's correct.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, those are my questions, and those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Michelle, any questions?
Just did you have a chance to inspect the property?
No, actually, I haven't. A colleague of mine did inspect this property not too long ago. So it has been inspected.
What was their assessment of its condition?
And they would agree it was an older property. It was definitely worn, as many older industrial properties are.
Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. Lynn, any questions?
Yes. Mr. Lobenstein, I'm just looking at your comps.
Mhm.
And as you pointed out that they're very good comps, are they all similar types of buildings in terms of M1 warehouse type properties? You didn't comment on that.
Sorry, yeah, they're all very similar type in of course in age and the area. Most of them are M2. They're not all M1.
Most are M2. Does that make a difference?
It can. It's not a huge difference. It's more of a difference when you see the M3 properties, the heavy manufacturing. They both M1 and M3 allow very similar types of buildings to be constructed.
I'm sorry, did you mean M1 and M2 allow similar? Yeah. Pardon? You cut out there.
Sorry, M1 and M2 allow similar types of buildings to be constructed, where M3 allows the heavy manufacturing.
Okay, and I appreciate that rent's not a huge issue here. But again, Mr. Reimer spent quite a bit of time on cap rate, and you indicated that the size is the main indicator here for driving that low cap rate that you have. So in terms of your model, perhaps you can't answer this. Is it given the same amount of weight as age, quality, that sort of thing? Or is size the main driver behind your cap rate in this type of property?
With this property, what we're seeing is similar properties. I mean, a property is a similar size. This is they're going for a similar cap rate. So they're going for a cap rate that's below 5%. And the reason for that is that properties like this have the capacity to fill up quickly with many different types of tenants, where when you have very large properties, it's usually very specific, the type of tenant that can go in there. Here you can have anything from carpenters to electricians to retail to storage. You can fill it up and have the ability to market to many different types of tenants at this size. Also, the price of the property is far lower than a larger property, so the risk would obviously be lower in terms of taking out a bank loan or something like that. So in terms of your question, yes, the weight of it is, there is a lot of weight put on the size of the property, but we do look at age as well.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lobenstein. I have no further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. If I go to page 12 on your brief, the second page of the mailer, the total of the leased area on the mailer is 5,190 square feet, which appears to be a discrepancy with what you're showing.
Just give me one moment here. So on my page 11, when they have total leased area or leasable area, they have 5,200 square feet. But they're also saying the average space vacant is 50%, which I don't think is correct. I think that maybe they just have some space in there that's not being fully utilized.
So, but you still have to assess for it, correct?
Right. Well, we're assessing for 5,500, and so you're saying it adds up to.
5190? Or
So
50,
yeah,
5,200 on the first page is what they
right.
filled.
Assessing for over 5,550 square feet. So we're assessing for more than what they're stating.
And during the last inspection, there was never any remeasurement of the premises?
No.
Okay, thank you. That was my only question. And Carrie, you can proceed with your presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I'd like to address that very last set of questions and Mr. Lovenstein's answer to that. I don't believe it's correct that, in fact, I know it's not correct that there's sort of some space that's not being used. If we turn briefly initially to my brief on page 25, please. So page 25, this is the same mailer that Mr. Lovenstein has in his materials. You can see that the year end, the fiscal year end for this property is June 30th of 2020. And so the 50% vacancy is actually the owner's calculation of the weighted vacancy for both units based on his fiscal year, not the calendar year. So if you turn to page 27, that is indeed, and I'm sure this is where Mr. Lovenstein's comments were coming from. It shows that the property at that time was fully leased by the two tenants, and that's absolutely right. But I believe the calculation of the 50%, if one turns then briefly to page 33, you can see that this is the previous mailer that there was a vacant unit of 3,375 square feet. I'm pretty certain that actually it was that vacant unit for a portion, not entirely the full year, because of course 3,300 is well over 50%, but it was vacant for a portion of the fiscal year leading up to the year end June 30th, 2020. So you'll see, Mr. Chairman, in my submission, I'm actually using 5,200 square feet based on the occupancy. There have been changes prior to the reference date, and it was based on the occupancy of a single tenant occupying the entire building. And that is the area we've applied in this case. So if I might ask the board, please, to turn initially or turn now to page 2 of our main submission, please. So we've got the property at 499 Madison. The effective age is 1954, no dispute there. The current assessment is $706,000, and we certainly believe this is very overvalued in this case for the reasons I'll speak to in a few minutes. And we're requesting a value of $417,000 in this case. If we turn then briefly to page 6 and 7. So on page 6, you can see the street view of the subject. At the bottom picture on page 6, we've got the aerial photograph from the department's mapping site. And on page 7, you can see, and Stephen and I both alluded to this earlier, the subject, of course, being having no parking on the subject site at all, and some loading in the back with the loading doors that Mr. Lovenstein referred to. Mr. Chairman, I'm as I say, I've alluded to in my questioning the wall height. The wall height for this property is only 12 feet, and I'm suggesting in no uncertain terms that is completely obsolete by modern industrial standards. Don't entirely disagree with Mr. Lovenstein's comments that, you know, this obviously isn't built for current tenants who need high cube warehouse space or anything like that. I completely agree with that, but I would certainly take that a step further and say that is a definite risk factor among a number of factors for these kind of properties, and 12 feet is simply obsolete for almost any industrial use, and what it results in is an inability of landlords for these types of properties to keep them full, which then in turn, of course, creates a higher, in our submission, a higher risk. The land to building ratio, as I've alluded to, is 1.25 to 1. I asked the question of Mr. Lovenstein if he was aware of the arrangements by the owner of the subject and that lot to the immediate north. That lot, of course, as I alluded to earlier, half of that lot is used for the tenants or tenant in this building for parking, and half of the lot is used for another property also owned by the same owner. That, I'd suggest, it's one of the points under examination this morning. When you've got an industrial property, and again, I go back to Mr. Lovenstein's comments, completely agree. If you've got heavy manufacturing, you're going to need a land to building ratio that's higher still. But when you start talking about land to building ratios for virtually any industrial use, that's sort of less than the 3 to 1 or perhaps 2.5 to 1. Well, now you've got both loading and parking issues, which again is a negative factor for the subject. And as far as the parking goes, that issue has been somewhat alleviated by the use of the adjacent parking lot, half of it by the tenants of this building. Failing that, of course, the tenant and all of their employees would have no place whatsoever to park for the day. That then results in our submission of a deduction from the capital value of only half the assessment of that lot, representing what the landlord needs to provide even basic minimum parking for the subject. If we then go to page 11, please. So Mr. Lovenstein had submitted the mailer for the June 30th, 2020 fiscal year end. But what's happened since between that time and January of 2021, just prior to the reference date, the landlord ended up securing a single tenant for the entire property. So as you can see at the bottom of page 11, there is a gross rent in place, including all property operating costs and taxes. It was negotiated in January 9th of 2021 and was for a 3-year term, not a particularly strong covenant, but it was for the entire building at the gross rent you see there. The gross rental rate equates to $14.46 a square foot using the 5,200 square feet. The property operating costs and taxes were $28,947, which equals operating costs in total of $557 a foot. That then, after deducting those costs, the indicated net rent based on that January 2021 lease is $889 a square foot. We're suggesting that rate represents the very best evidence of the rent achievable for the subject, and we will ultimately be applying that rent. On page 12, I'm not going to dwell on this because I think it was Ms. Nesbitt that alluded to the fact that rent is not really under examination, and that's absolutely correct. We are applying the rent in place of $889, and actually falls, as you can see on page 12, falls towards the higher end of the range for properties in the area with lease start dates in 2019 and 2020. Notwithstanding the average and median rates there being sort of in the 7.25 to 775 range, we're going to apply the $889 per square foot as negotiated under that January 2021 lease. So at the top of page 13 there, you can see our total potential market income is $46,252, which is actually a wee bit higher than the modeled rate submitted by Mr. Lovenstein this morning. It's in rough terms, it's $6,000 higher than the department's rent. As far as the vacancy allowance, we are applying 7%, but as I had referred the board and Mr. Lovenstein to earlier, this property has historically suffered significant vacancies of between 50 and 65%. But critically, the vacancy as of the reference date had actually been resolved based on this 3-year tenancy that the owner secured. And so we are, in this case, applying the 7%, but I'm certainly suggesting there would be an element, a risk element here that would need to be reflected in the cap rate, and that's what we propose to do this morning. Shortfall rate is $385 a square foot, consistent with the department's rate. Non-recovered expenses, with your permission, Mr. Chairman, I'll speak to that very shortly, but I propose to go through it at a very high level. I know the board members and Mr. Lovenstein have heard it many, many times, so I'll speak to that very briefly in a few minutes. We are suggesting the application of the full 5% for non-recoverables, 2% for structural, for a total allowance of 7%, as opposed to the department's rate of 3% that's been applied in their valuation. Turning then to page 14, again, I'm going to propose to speak to the capitalization rate study one time in connection with this submission and ask that those comments be carried forward through to the remainder of the properties on the docket to save us a little bit of time. The capitalization rate study that I'll speak to in a few minutes indicates a capitalization rate for low quality, and I make certainly no bones about it. I'm viewing this as a low quality industrial property at a minimum of 8%, which assumes that the 5% non-recoverable expense allowance is applied for the purposes of this property, given the wall height of 12 feet, the low land to building ratio with limited, I state there no parking or loading capacity. It's got no parking and limited loading capacity. And the tenant, of course, that was secured ultimately was based on only a 3-year term, which indicates a weaker covenant. So in those circumstances, we're suggesting a rate of 8.25 in this case. The adjustment for the parking lot, I spoke to the separately assessed lot just to the north of the property. The screen snip you see on page 14 represents the 2024 assessment of that lot at 102,000. And what we suggest, Mr. Chairman, on page 15 is we're taking half of that assessment, 51,000, representing the availability of the parking for the tenant of this property on that lot, and we make that deduction from the capital value of our valuation. Turning then to page 16. So our final valuation, again, we're applying a market rent based on the lease in place, so about $6,000 higher than the departments at $46,252. Applying the 7% vacancy using the parameters you see there for shortfall, non-recoverable, and structural, resulting in an NOI of $38,602 and a capitalization rate of 8.25, which in turn results in a suggested value of $467,902, and then deducting the half of the lot to the north results in a total final value of $416,902, rounded to $417,000. I'll just go through it very, very briefly on pages 19 through 23. There's some photos of the interior. The photographs were actually taken by a colleague of mine at Altus, and I didn't have a chance to inspect the property, but the photographs were taken by my colleague, and certainly it reinforces the view that in all the circumstances, the property is reflecting its age to a very large extent. On pages 25 through, I'm guessing it's through to the end of the brief. Yes, 25 through 38. There are a few of the mailers that were sent in. The mailer on page 25 being the same one Mr. Laubenstein had submitted, indicating that 50% vacancy rate based on the weighted average for the larger unit at that time prior to the single tenant taking occupancy. If you turn to page 31, the owner is showing the 65% vacancy rate. And finally, on page 35, the 50% vacancy rate. So notwithstanding the occupancy of the single tenant on the 3-year term for the subject, I certainly suggest that kind of history, and given the physical characteristics of the property, warrants a substantial adjustment on the capitalization rate, hence the 8.25 suggested rate that we're applying. So, Mr. Chairman, if I could ask the board members and Mr. Laubenstein then to turn to our, first of all, our non-recoverable expense study. And I am going to go, as I say, through this at a very high level. Happy to answer any questions if there's topics in there based on the board's review that I haven't addressed. Happy to go through it. But if we go then initially to page 9 of that study, please. On page 9, we list, there's a wide variety of non-recoverable expense allowances or expenses, I should say, that one finds on the income statements for these kinds of properties. And they range, as you can see, there's a total of actually about 12 different expense categories there. Of those 12, though, there's several that, in fact, the majority of them were not paying any attention to. Things like financing fees, depreciation, utilities for vacant units is not a factor because that's reflected in shortfall. The mortgage interest, those kind of things are simply not relevant or are accounted for and under different allowances that both the department and Altus have applied. So going to page 10, the submission on the non-recoverable fundamentally relates to four expenses that one finds consistently in the statements, with the exception of one. I'll speak to that in a second. What you find very consistently as far as the expenses is the leasing commissions, professional fees, and advertising marketing. In some very limited cases, there are asset management fees, but they are few and far between and have nominal impact on the overall results of the study. But where we found them, then we did include them, but again, very, very rare actually. So the chart on page 11, we show the second from the right-hand column is the results of our analysis. The header I note says 3-year, it should say 5-year. For most of the properties, we did update the previous study to account for a full 5-year analysis. Results in an average of 6.64%, a median of 5.98. If one were to include the TIs, and we're not suggesting that, but for the purposes of the hearing this morning, and there's been, of course, over the years, a strong debate about the whole concept of NERs and net effective rent calculations, which effectively take dollar for dollar accounting for all the tenant inducements and tenant improvements. The column on the right would be essentially doing that, and results in a much higher percentage, over 10% average if one includes those TIs, and an 8.6 median if one includes those TIs. To be clear, Mr. Chairman, we provide that for reference, but we are not relying on that data set. We are applying just those 4 expenses that relate to the commission's advertising, marketing, and I thought I knew this off by heart, professional fees, of course. If I could turn then briefly to page 12. And this is in addition to the study for 2023, and the purpose of this is to illustrate to the board the impact on our capitalization rate analysis of different assumptions relating to the non-recoverable expense only. The reason it's important, in our cap rate analysis, we've applied the full 5%, and the mathematical effect of reducing it from 5% to 1%, let's say, which is what the department's done. They've applied the total rate of 3, which in from our perspective still relates to the 2% structural plus 1% for non-recoverable. So what we've set forth in these pages 12 through 15 illustrates the effect of the reduction of the non-recoverable expense allowance using the very same assumptions as far as potential rent, sale price, vacancy, everything staying exactly the same. So on page 13, using the assumptions that I set forth at the top of page 13, if one applies the 5% non-recoverable expense allowance, the indicated cap rate is 7.38%. And that, again, is the methodology we've used to be including the full 5%. If you turn to page 15, then, again, the mathematical effect of reducing the non-recoverable allowance from 5 to 1, keeping the other allowance at 2%, resulting in a total expense allowance of 3. The indicated cap rate for that very same property using the very same assumptions jumps to 7.71%, a 33 basis point increase. So the reason we've put this in, Mr. Chairman, is if the board were inclined to apply only 3%, then we would request a 25% increase in our capitalization rate to reflect the effect of that on our cap rate analysis.
I thought you were going to be brief.
As brief as I can. I'll be even briefer with the industrial cap rate. If I could ask the board members and Mr. Laubenstein to turn to the cap rate study. So go to initially page 11. And again, I propose to only go through this once. It's actually the vacancy rate in this case is not an issue, but it will be certainly a factor possibly on a go forward. So the reported vacancy rates, and this is on page 11 now, the reported vacancy rates for industrial buildings in Winnipeg overall, including owner occupied, was 3%. And the single tenant investment vacancy rates range from 5.1 to 9.2 over the past 10 years. Multi-tenant from 5.8 to 8.1 with an average of 7. So in situations where vacancy has not been an issue, and that's certainly not going to be the case with some of the properties this morning, but where vacancy has been reasonably stable, we typically will apply 4% vacancy rate, as we state on the second last paragraph of page 11. Moving then to page 16 briefly. These are on page 16, the capitalization rate analysis that we had done for the pre-pandemic, for the prior assessment. So you can see there in the chart, it ranges, the rates range from 6.36% to 6.94%. Then if you turn to page 17, this is the updated analysis and the additional properties that we considered for this reassessment. As you can see, the indicated range is from 6.5 to 9.1%. And based on the analysis of those transactions and with reference to our previous analysis, bottom of page 17, we've got sort of different stratifications of the industrial stock. Class A, we suggest, would have a rate of between 6 and 6.5. Class B, 6.5 to 7.5, and non-investment grade at 8% plus. And again, Mr. Chairman, I make certainly no, it's very clear to me, I should say, that this is a non-investment grade property, and we are certainly treating it as such. So with all of those comments then, we are requesting a reduction, primarily cap rate being the issue in this case, but ultimately capitalization rate and also the deduction of the half of the value of the adjacent lot, resulting in the value of $417,000, and ask the board to order accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen, do you have any questions?
Yeah, just a few questions. I'll just continue with the cap rate where we left off. Again, you talked about non-investment grade. I believe that's an Altus definition. Is that correct?
Actually, not quite.
No.
If one turns to page, oh yes, you're right, at the top of the page. So Mr. Olmstein, at the top of page 16, non-investment grade, this talks about certain sectors of Winnipeg's property supply that fall below the A and B categories, and the A and B categories to a large extent are on page 15 with the broker definitions. You can see there, Class A obviously being the newer, high cubes, very good quality properties. The B being Class B being average to good properties, and non-investment grade. Mr. Laubenstein, it's set forth in Altus's materials. It is not a concept that is in any way foreign to investors and real estate brokers. They talk about non-investment grade properties all the time, being the older stock with very, very limited potential to attract the tenants based on the characteristics we see here. So while we've set it forth in our study, it is a concept that is absolutely known to the real estate community.
Okay, but investors will still purchase buildings that are over 8%.
Investors will certainly apply capitalization rates north of 8% for properties that are inferior. Yes.
Okay, and in this situation, your client is an investor in this building. It's not owner occupied, correct?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay. So an investor has purchased this property.
Yeah, for $106,000 way back 20 years, and I'm agreeing with you that sale, given where it was, it has little relevance. But yes, they did.
Okay. My other question regards on your page 16 of your brief. You have an adjustment.
Sorry, Mr. Laubenstein, cap rate or main brief?
Oh, sorry, your main brief.
Okay, got it. Okay.
Yeah. You have an adjustment there for the land value. We spoke about it briefly, what it is. The property gets to use it, but you deducted $51,000 from it, that's half of what the roll number is, what it's valued at. The assessment is right.
Yeah, exactly right. Yeah.
And now, is this a common practice in appraisal to take a property adjacent to the property and reduce, and basically use it to reduce the overall value?
It's very, I'm not an appraiser, Mr. Laubenstein, but I'll speak to that with a whole lot of experience in assessment. And yes, it is a practice that has routinely been followed where the subject property doesn't have sufficient land for parking or other uses, but usually it's parking where the subject doesn't have sufficient parking for the subject itself. The deduction of the associated land is routinely made in assessment. In this case, typically it's somewhat unusual for the adjacent vacant land parcel to be split between two properties, but that's the case here. It's split between this one and another property further up the street, so I've only deducted half of it. But yes, this is done in assessment routinely.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Thank you. Lynn, any questions?
Yes, just following up on that question about the parking lot. Is that a formal agreement, Mr. Reimer?
It is an as I understand it, I haven't seen the full lease terms, Ms. Nesbitt, but it is a requirement of the tenant and is provided on that basis. But I have not seen the lease agreement.
So I'm sorry, you're saying that there is a formal agreement between the owner of that parking lot and the tenants of or subject property for use of the parking?
Subject and one other property. Essentially, the tenants of this building and one other one up the street each get to use half the parking lot, and it's a requirement. It's a requirement of those tenants to have that access. So that was formally agreed to. I don't have the written document though.
Okay, thank you. No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. And Michelle?
Just in regards to the square footage, the 5,200, is that based on an assessment of usable square footage, or is that based on measurements that Altus have done of the actual physical structure?
It's actually based on the area agreed to by the landlord and tenant when the single tenant moved in. So it wasn't Altus's measurements. If you turn, Ms. Duncan and Ms. Chairman, if we might turn to page 11. So when the single tenant moved in January of 2021, the area that they agreed upon for the purposes of leasing the entire building was 5,200. The owner has always treated it as 5,200 sort of give or take, and I've assumed that is correct, but if the area is out by a few square feet, the gross rent of course is set, so whatever any small discrepancy in the area might be, the rent wouldn't change. And it is based on that 5,200 square feet agreed with that single tenant.
Okay, thank you. No further questions.
Thank you. I just have one. Who owns that vacant lot?
The owner of this property owns that vacant lot.
So
Yeah.
why wouldn't they merge it?
I'm guessing, you know what? I don't know. Good question. The lot is used by two different buildings, so maybe that's a factor, but I do not know the answer to that question.
Okay, that was my only question, and I think that concludes this property. The next one on the docket is 489 Madison Street. Any preliminary issues on this one?
Nope.
Nope.
Okay, Stephen, you can proceed, and anything said in the first hearing regarding cap rates and non-recoverables will just carry on for the rest of these.
Sure.
Thank you.
Rather than hear it again.
Okay. The roll number is 0700112250. The address is 489 Madison Street. We have an effective year built of 1962, wall height of 15 feet, and zoning M1 light manufacturing. We have a land area of 14,596 square feet. We have a gross floor area of 766,000 square feet and leasable area of 7,324 square feet. And we have a land to plan of 1.9. Onto my page 2, you can see that they are compliant. And there's been no recent sales of the property. Again, for this property, you can go to my page 3 and you can see the rent comparables. Again, they're all in very similar location to the subject property. They're on Border, Dublin, King Edward, St. Matthews, St. James, and Notre Dame. Here I have broken up the, so we have valued this property. I'll quickly just go to my page 4, or sorry, page 4. And you can see we have it broken up into 3 different premises. So that's how the model is valuing it, as if each premise is separate at between basically 2,400 square feet. So that's how I've looked at my comparables. So they range from 1,800 square feet all the way up to 4,000 square feet. You can see that the lease starts 2019, 2020, there's a 2012, 2017. So they're fairly recent lease starts, and the lease terms are fairly close to market or very similar to market, 3 years to 10 years. Again, we're looking at wall heights. So this subject property is at 15 feet, I believe I said. So we're looking at slimmer types of property ranging as low as 12 feet all the way up to 22 feet. And the effective year builds are very similar as well, ranging from 1968 all the way up to 1980. And then you can see that the net rents support our model rent of, and so they range from $7 all the way up to $7.80 or $7.95 a square foot. So moving down to my page 4, again, I've spoken about our premises, and you can see the rents there. We have a blended rent of $7.38, and we're getting a potential rent of $54,067. We're applying the 7% vacancy, 3% expenses, and this time we have a 5.15% capitalization rate. Applying that to the net operating income of $46,808, we get our value of $909,000. Moving to my page 6, which is our capitalization rate chart. Again, industrial second from the top. You can see this one falls out of the 20th to 80th percentile again. This is dealing with the size of the property. It's still smaller at 7,000 square feet. And it is slightly newer than the other property. It's a 1962 effective year built, not 1956. So we can, again, look at the location of the property. It's just down the street from the initial one. You can see that on the map on my page 8. Again, you can see the overhead view. There is some parking beside the property. My page 9 shows you the rear part where they load and the materials. You can see the overhead doors. And then further down, you can see the front of the building, and there's some street parking in front of it. And also there is access to the building as well from the street and from the rear. And moving forward, we can go to page 11, which is the income and expense mailer. So again, it is gross rents they're showing here. They're showing a net operating income of $37,307. They have a total leasable area $7,700, which is inconsistent with ours. As I spoke to before, we're assessing the leasable area lower, so this is something that we'll have to look at. Where we have a leasable area of 7,324 square feet and a gross floor of 766,000 square feet. So that's something that we're going to have to consider going forward. And again, you can see on my page 12, there are some tenants in this property, and there is some vacancy as well. They have broken up their tenants similar to how we have broken up our premises as well. So that being said, we feel the value is fair at $909,000 and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carrie, any questions?
Just a couple, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Mr. Lobenstein, can we turn to your page 4, please?
Yep.
So just to be clear, this is model driven again from top to bottom, right from potential rent through to cap rate, correct?
Correct, yep.
And the 7% is also a modeled vacancy allowance for all the properties in this area?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, questions asked and answered, please, on cap rate and non-recoverable. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Lynn, any questions?
No, I do not have questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And Michelle, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions, thank you. So, Carrie, you can go ahead with your presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Could we turn briefly to page 2, please? This property is mentioned 49 Madison, 1962, effective age, 1 story. Interesting, and Mr. Lobenstein, I noticed that too. The department's applied 7,324 square feet. We are actually applying the gross building area of 7,666. I believe the owner has overestimated the total square footage at 7,700. It's larger than the whole building itself. So we are applying the 7666 in our valuation, suggesting a revision to the subject to a value of 558,000. If we go briefly then to page 7. There is a typo, and Mr. Chairman, I know you will have caught that, I'm sure. So on page 7, the first paragraph, it says the improvements were constructed in 19, and there's too many digits there. They were constructed in 1962. Have a wall height of only 15 feet, which is obsolete, I'd suggest. The reported leasable area at over 7,700 square feet. As I say, I think this is an error, and we've just applied the gross building area of 7666 in our analysis, which includes a vacant area of 2,591 square feet. So it's that area that we've adjusted downwards to get to the gross building area to be used in the valuation. Land to building is slightly better than the previous, but still very, very poor at 1.90 to 1. If we turn to page 11, there were 2 tenants paying gross rents in the subject as of the reference date. One was at $12 a square foot and another at $13. After deducting the gross lease cost of $368 a foot, the net rents in place ranged from $832 a foot to $932 a foot for the unit 489. Again, on page 12, a list of the same comparables we had. I believe the subject's rates are actually at the upper end of that, those indicators for leases negotiated in the area in the 2019 and 2020. Then on page 13, as you can see there, we've calculated our potential net market income as $67,919, which includes the application of the 2 net rents in place after deducting the gross lease costs, and also a net rent of, an optimistic in my view, but a net rent of $9 a square foot, being consistent with the indicators from the other 2 units in September of 20 and July of 19. So the potential rent we're applying is actually substantially higher than the department. The department, if you recall, had a roughly $54,000. We've got just under $68,000. But a crucial difference in our analysis relates to the vacancy. Recall, Mr. Chairman, I asked about the vacancy allowance of 7%, confirming that it was model driven. But in this case, I'd suggest the vacancy allowance should be much higher. The property was suffering, and the attachments for these mailers, or I should say these mailers are attached for the board's reference. Since 2016, the actual vacancy rates range from 25 to 75%, including crucially a vacancy rate of 33% in 2019 and 2020 and through the reference date. So we're going to apply a vacancy allowance of 20% in this case, notwithstanding the 33% actual rate. We're applying a stabilized chronic vacancy allowance of 20% in our analysis. Using the same shortfall rate, non-recovered, we spoke of earlier, and then turning to page 14. In this case, for the same reasons we've discussed, this property in our view is a non-investment grade property, a poor property in the scheme of things for industrial holdings, and we're applying a rate of 8% based upon our capitalization rate indicators. On page 15 then, if you see the valuation there, the $67,919 higher potential net market income, but with the 20% vacancy allowance and the 8% cap, we come in at $558,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, any questions?
It's just about the vacancy rate. So you're using 20% because a portion of this building's been vacant since 2016. Sorry, is that the understanding?
Since 2016, the vacancy rate has, at its lowest, was 25%, and its highest was 75%, and it was 33% in 19 and 20. So yeah, we picked 20% based on not as high as the actual, but based on the that analysis. Yep.
Have they consistently had tenants in this building? It's just one unit that seems to be vacant.
They've consistently certainly had some tenants in the building. Let's take a look if it's the same unit that's been vacant throughout, the unit 493. So if you turn to page 35, that's the most recent mailer, the June 2020, that's got 493. The unit, again, reported as 2,700, but we've actually used a slightly lower area to make it equal the gross building area. Page 40, again, that's unit 493. Page 45, the prior one at that's again unit 493. And on page 49, it was actually unit 491, not 493 that was vacant. So in 2016, it was the middle unit 491, but since the tenant OSC moved out of 493, that's been the one that's been chronically vacant since that time.
Okay, those are all my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And Lynn?
No questions, thank you.
I have a question concerning the mailer on page 33, sorry.
Yes.
Shows total leasable of 7,700 square feet.
Yeah. Yeah, that's larger than the gross building area, and we've applied the gross building area of 7,000. Let me get my exact figures here: 7,666. So 34 square feet less.
And the assessor's at 7,324 square feet.
Yeah.
And on page 1.
I list 7324. Could I ask the board members, Mr. Lobenstein, to change that to 7666? Being the gross building area?
And you were right, I did catch that.
I thought you might.
Okay, that was my only question, and that concludes this property. The next one on the docket is 485 Madison. Any preliminary issues?
No, Mr. Chairman.
No.
Okay, Stephen, you can proceed.
Okay. The roll number is 070011255000. It's 485 Madison. We have a assessed value of $652,000. We have an effective year built of 1958, wall height of 14 feet, and the zoning's the M1 light manufacturing. We have a land area of 6,683 square feet. A gross floor and leasable area, they're very similar, 5,025 square feet, and the leasable area is 5,000 square feet. We have a land to planned area of 1.33. Again, on my page 2, they are compliant, as you can see. And page 3 has the rent comparables. So again, I've broken them up. If you look at my page 4, we have it broken into 3 premises. We have a larger one at 3,500 square feet and 2 smaller ones at 800 and 700 square feet. So to show the model, we're going to look at rent comparables that are similar. Again, I have some that are 911 square feet, 816 square feet, and then I have larger ones ranging from as high as 5,800 square feet all the way down to 3,125 square feet. The lease starts range from 2014 all the way up to 2019. The wall heights are similar to the subject property. They're as low as 11 and they go as high as 22 feet. And the effective years built are similar to the property, ranging from 1964 all the way up to 1979. And you can see the rents as well. They range from $7 a square foot all the way up to $12.96 a square foot. So when we look at my page 4, we can see we get a potential rent of $36,910. Where again, we're applying the 7% vacancy, 3% expenses, and a overall capitalization rate of 4.9%. When we capitalize the net operating income, we get an estimated value of $652,000. Page 6, you can see that it is the industrial properties. Again, this falls out of the 20th to 80th percentile we spoke about before at 4.95%. As I alluded to, it's mostly due to its size. Further down, we can see on page 8, again, it's located in a very similar location to the other properties. And just down the street, you can see the overhead view, very similar type, parking on the front The entrances are on the front, and then at the rear you have the overhead doors. Page 10 shows that there is a gross income and that there are tenants. They have a net operating income of $32,947. They're showing a total leasable area of 4,800 square feet. So again, there's a discrepancy between what the city has and what the owner has put. And they've broken up their tenants as well. On page 11, you can see they have one tenant at 3,500 square feet, another one at 800, and another one at 600 square feet. So we feel the value of 652,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carrie, any questions?
Just one, Mr. Lovenstein, your page 4. I think you've certainly implied it, but this is model driven from top to bottom, correct?
That's correct, yep.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Questions asked and answered, please, on cap and non-recoverable. That's my only question.
Thank you. Michelle, any questions?
Yes, have you inspected this property?
No, I have not.
Okay, thank you.
And Lynn, any questions?
No questions, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
And I have no questions. Thank you. And that concludes. No, it doesn't conclude, sorry. Okay, Carrie, you can make your presentation.
Thank you very much. Could we turn to page 7, please? So again, this is very similar to the previous discussions. Very low land to building ratio, 1.33, and very much obsolete. I'd suggest low wall height, older age. Now, one thing I did want to draw to the board's attention, and Mr. Lovenstein alluded to it, the mailer that was sent in by the owner on the income page, he actually shows 5,000 square feet. Let me make sure I'm quoting this correctly. There's some slight area discrepancies. Yeah, he quotes 4,800 square feet. The department's got 5,000, but if one looks at the rental information, it adds up to 4,900 consistently. So we've applied 4,900 square feet specifically based on the areas set forth in the rent rolls for the property through the years, and that's the area we'll apply in our analysis. On page 13, shows how we got to our potential net market income. Again, it's actually a tick higher than the department's PNMI by roughly 10%. We're about $3,000 higher than the modeled rent at $40,264, which includes the 2 leases in place, as you see there. Gross leases brought down to net by deduction of the operating costs, and a market rent of $850 a square foot for the vacant unit. That unit, the 487B, has been vacant since 2017. So with the our adjusted using the adjusted total area of 4,900 square feet, not 5,000 and not 4,800, the vacancy rate was actually 12.2%, and we've applied 10% in this case to reflect that the fact that it was 12.2% vacant fully 5 years leading up to the reference date and through the reference date. Non-recoverable expenses based on the reasons discussed previously, and cap rate. Again, for the same reasons we discussed in the first property, with a very low land to building ratio, older age, low wall heights, and the situation with the property here, we're applying 8.25%. On page 15, then you've got our valuation using those parameters, and we come in at a suggested value of $386,000. Thank you.
Thank you. Stephen, any questions?
I have no questions.
And Lynn?
No questions. Thank you.
And Michelle?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions. So that concludes 485 Madison Street.
Mr. Chair, can we take a little break?
Yeah, we can take a 10-minute break.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. We'll reconvene the hearing this morning. And the next property on the docket is 1466 Arlington Street. And I understand there is a preliminary issue on this one.
That's correct. Yeah, we're seeking non-compliance.
Okay, well, you can read the information on page 1 of your brief and your request for non-cooperation, and then we'll hear from the appellant.
Sure. The roll number is 14022146100 1466 Arlington Ave. As you can see on my recommendation, we are seeking non-compliance for this property. If you go down to my page 11, you can see that we had sent it out. That's the tracking number. I'm also showing that that's the mailer that we sent out for it, which was never returned. So this property hasn't been compliant since 2016. They have a different mailing address from the 1466 Arlington. The mailing address is 820 Burroughs Avenue. That's the owner of the building, the trustees of Ukraine Greek Orthodox Cathedral. So that is where the income expense mailers are going. They have been signed in the past by the treasurer and sent in, but again stopped in 2016. I've shown on my page 13 previous times we have sent it out. This is from 2018, where it was sent. It was signed at the time, and again, it wasn't sent in. So we are seeking non-compliance for this property.
Thank you. And Carrie, any questions, comments?
Just a couple of questions. Mr. Lovenstein, could we go briefly to your page 11?
Mm-hmm.
So the tracking number at the top, like the Canada Post tracking number that ends in 375 CA, and then it's got the dates of June 9th and 10th. That's the tracking from the mailer for the calendar year 2020?
Yeah.
Okay. But on page 13, that's a different tracking, and that's for a tracking from a previous. Okay.
I just wanted to show that it's been going to the same place. It's been sent out before, and even in 2018, it wasn't returned. So I'm just pattern here is all.
But there's no evidence, Mr. Lovenstein, for the 2020 request, which I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe that forms the basis of this request fundamentally.
Correct.
There's nothing in your materials that shows the address to which the tracking number ending in 375 CA, where that was sent.
Well, we sent all our stuff to the mailing addresses that are that we have in our Manta system, where we've always sent them. I understand that tracking number doesn't have the actual address on it. We don't have the addresses on the 2018 one as well. We did get a signature though at that time. So
actually, I think you do have the address for the 18, because is that not what you got on page 14?
Correct. That's the envelope though.
Yeah, that's the envelope that shows the address, and that was for the 2018.
Sure.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, those are my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Michelle, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Lynn?
Mr. Lobenstein, I just want to make clear that this INE has been sent consistently to the same address.
Consistently, yes. And they had sent them in consistently until 2016, and we haven't received a mailer since then.
Okay. Does the department follow up on occasion with these folks that do not send it in when they have been previously?
Yes, we have sent. We do follow up. There was no note in this one on whether it was followed up or not, but yes, it is part of our practice to follow up.
Okay, but in this instance, there was no follow-up?
Not to my knowledge. Usually we would put a note in or something similar stating that we have followed them. But.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Mr. Lobenstein.
And I have no questions, so the board will recess.
I think Mr. Reimer.
Oh, Mr. Reimer.
Thank you. So, Mr. Chairman, I am my concern here, and I understand Mr. Lovenstein is working with what the department's giving him, but ultimately the Litchison case, of course, says if you're gonna ask for the penalties, you have to provide the evidence that the request made its way to the owner. And the concern, as you might have gleaned from my questions, was the tracking number that shows the address on page 14 is a tracking number related to a prior INE form versus the tracking on page 11, which is, of course, for the 2020 year. I have no doubt, I'm not in any way suggesting that Mr. Lovenstein is misrepresenting it when he makes the statement that they were sent to the same address, but I'd suggest it's incumbent on the department following Litchison to show that that 2020 request was sent to the same address, notwithstanding the verbal advice given by Mr. Lovenstein. So those would be my only comments for the boards to consider. Thank you.
Thank you. I just have one question of Stephen. So was there no mailer sent in 2019?
Yes, the mailers are sent consistently. But I was just trying to show the pattern. I guess I should have put I guess I was showing the important years, the 18 years and the 2020 years when we need the information.
Right, but they're sent out annually, correct?
Yes, they are. That's correct. Yeah. But again, we haven't received them since 2016, like any year, 2016, 2017, 2018, 2019. So.
And this was never under appeal before, where you would have asked for a deferral?
This has not been under appeal for some time, no. Let's see when it was last appealed. Yeah, I mean, this seems to be its first appeal from what I can see.
Okay, thank you. The board will take a 5-minute recess to consider the matter. Thanks. The panel has considered the assessor's request for the burden of proof be shifted, and we have denied that request under, and I guess the reason is because the lack of adequate evidence to support that request. So we will proceed with your presentation, Stephen.
Okay. Just give me 1 minute here. Okay. I've already read in the roll number. So the address is 1466 Arlington Street. The assessed value is $506,000. We have a actual year built between 1921 and 1963. And we have an overall effective year built of 1956. We have C2 zoning. The land area is 7,388 square feet. We have a leasable and gross floor area of 6,360 square feet and a land to plan of 1.16. So we'll move to my page 4. You can see that we're applying the leasable area to the whole area. It's not broken up into premises, so that's 6,360 square feet. We're applying $7.17 a square foot. So that was my page 4. On page 3, we have the rent comparables. So we're looking at Wellington, Winnipeg Ave, Barrie, Sanford, Gillespie, and St. Matthews. I had to expand out the area a little bit because this isn't really a common industrial area. But you can see that we're looking at similar effective years built, similar leasable areas. The lease starts are fairly recent, some of 2020, 2019, 2018. The lease terms are similar to market, ranging from 1 year to 10 years. And then, of course, the wall heights range from 12 feet to 17 feet. And these market rents, which support our model rent, range from $6.75 a square foot up to $10.02 a square foot. So moving back to my page 4, you can see we have a potential rent of $45,601. We have a vacancy, a model vacancy of 6.5%. We have 3% expenses, and We have a 7.10% cap rate. So, and that's pretty interesting. So we have a similar aged building, which is a similar size to the properties we saw before, but we have a much higher model cap rate. And that's due to the area at 1466 Arlington area, in Arlington. So the area is far different from St. James. St. James is far superior compared to this area, which is why this one is getting a higher cap rate. Excuse me. So we're looking at an overall value of $560,000. Again, so now we're looking at our capitalization rate chart. This falls between the 20th and 80th percentile at 7.1%. It's higher than any of the outside sources you can see on the right hand side of aside from some of the industrial B categories that CBRE has. Moving further to my page 9, you can take a look at the property. So you can see that there's basically only street parking. My page 9, you can see the front on page 10. And you can see that there is an overhead door as well at the rear of the property, or the side of the property. I mean. And again, you can see on my page 11 and 14, we've already gone over, are the income expense mailers that weren't sent in. So we feel the value of $506,000 is $60,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Carrie, any questions?
Just a couple, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Lovenstein, on your page 4 then, and again, I believe you referred to it, but these are all model driven from top to bottom, these valuation factors?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Now, the department's got the actual year built. The initial building was 1921 and there was an addition in 1963. And if you don't know, Mr. Lovenstein, that's okay because I've got it in my materials, but are you aware of how that breaks down as far as the area that was built in 21 versus 63?
I do not know.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. That's my only other question. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
Thank you. And Lynn, any questions?
Yes, I just have a question about your rent comps, Mr. Lobenstein.
Yeah.
You indicated you did have to go outside of the area. Are these, I think you mentioned that these were C2 zoning. The subject was C2 zoning. What
Yeah.
about your rent comps?
No, they're basically all M2 zoning.
So C2 zoning versus M2 zoning, is there a substantive difference in the type of property or what it could be used for?
Yeah, C2 zoning will let you build different types of properties. Just give me a moment here. Is it? So yeah, the C2 only to accommodate intensive commercial sites, include some attractive commercial recreation and service type facilities. So although we have this pucked as an industrial property due to sort of its attributes, having an overhead door, sort of the way the building's laid out with the higher wall height, the zoning is C2. So it wouldn't allow for like extensive manufacturing.
But your rent comps would allow for extensive manufacturing?
Yeah, it would allow for more like storage warehouse, some manufacturing and such. But the thing about M2 zoning is it allows for anything. You can have retail in there as well. So there is some similarities between M2 and C2.
So the nature of our subject property, is it used as a commercial operation right now, despite its industrial warehouse attributes?
% sure what it's being used for because we haven't got an income and expense mailer in a long time, so I don't know exactly what's in there. There was a company in there one time called Scope Incorporated. I'm not too sure what they do.
Okay. And what about your rent comparables? Are they mostly manufacturing type entities or?
If you just give me a moment, I can let you know. So Wellington is just a numbered company, so I don't know what they do in there. One is Barry's a security solutions company. Sanford's a sales company. Gillespie's and I'm not too sure. LV Control, and then St. Matthews is an industrial sort of manufacturing company. So
it really ranges the types of uses that are in these M2s.
correct.
Okay, from a investment perspective, would a C2 zoning be viewed the same as an M2 zoning? Is one superior?
I think in this situation, it's more the zoning doesn't really have much of an issue because of the type of building that's on it. It's an older building. It can only be used for so many things. I wouldn't say one is superior to the other. They just allow for different buildings.
Okay. Did you take a look for similar types of C2 zoned rent comps or not find any, or what were you going for when you selected these specific rent comparables?
Yeah. So for the rent comparables on my page 3, again, what I'm showing you is I'm looking for leased area, wall height, effective year built, and I'm trying to get as close as I can for area in terms of.
So zoning really wasn't a factor. It was mostly just the nature of the building.
Correct. And also because it's just in this area, it's very difficult to find comparables. So I basically would have to look for different types of zoning as well.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Lobenstein.
Thank you.
No further questions, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. When was it last inspected?
We vacated the company in July of 2020, so there would have been a possible like door knocking inspection then, but the whole building would not have been inspected then.
So is it completely vacant?
Again, we haven't received the mailers, so I don't know, but we did at the time when we vacated them in July of 2020, it would have been vacant because we didn't put another tenant back in there.
And the BA was deleted, business assessment?
Yeah, we have it as vacant.
Okay. Thank you. That was my only question. Carrie, you can start with your presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I alluded in my question of Mr. Lobenstein as to the how the stages of the construction in this case, and the board need not turn there. I'll say it verbally, but on the very last page of our submission, we've got a copy of that breakdown. The 1921 construction was actually 4,800 square feet. So the vast majority of the improvements on site were built in 21. The 1963 edition was 1,560 square feet. If we turn to page 7, pages 6 and 7, you can see a street view on page 6 and the aerial view on page 7. And I'm agreeing with Mr. Lobenstein's comments. We've actually, the rent comps we've used are based on lower quality industrial space, notwithstanding the C2 zoning. And in this case, I'd suggest to the board that the location of the subject, there's locational challenges, very much so in this case, with the property located at the corner of Arlington and Magnus, and the C2 zoning. And Ms. Nesbitt's comments, I think, are certainly on point as far as the distinction between C2 and M2. But I suggest, Mr. Chairman, that based on the physical characteristics of the property and the locational issues, there's not a lot that would turn on that as far as how the property would be valued, things like cap rate and rental rate and such. And we've treated, as Mr. Lovenstein has, my rent comparables are based upon lower quality industrial warehouse type comparables. And that chart is set out on page 12 of our materials. So on page 12, you can see the rental range starts from very low at 269 a foot up to a high of 932. Generally consistent in a lot of cases with the range presented by Mr. Laubenstein. The median and average is 636 and 650. And based upon that, the potential market rent we're applying at the bottom of page 12 is based on 650 a foot for a total rent of 41,340. The turning to page 13, I can confirm, and as Mr. Laubenstein alluded to, but I can also confirm that the property is and was through most of 2020 into 2021, 100% vacant. There has been no tenant in that property, and based upon the 100% vacancy as of the reference date and in the year leading up to the reference date, we're suggesting a rate of 12.5% in this case. Non-recoverable and capitalization rate, those questions and comments be carried forward from the previous hearings. Given the risk factors in this case, including the age, condition, locational issues, we're suggesting a capitalization rate of 8.5% for this particular property. Then going to page 14 with the application of 650 a foot, the vacancy allowance was 12.5 in the context of that 100% vacancy, and an 8.5 cap, we come in at 360,000. And that's our request this morning. Photographs of the subject are attached to our submission, starting at page 17 and continuing through to page 30. You can see the photos of the various areas in the building. And board might appreciate, with the original age of the majority of the improvements being in the 20s, the building is not only reflecting its age, but the condition leaves a lot to be desired. And between that and the locational issues and the fact that the property efforts were made to secure tenants in the property as of the reference date and have been for some time, and with no success whatsoever. So in that context, I suggest the 8.5% cap rate reflects the risk for this particular asset. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen, any questions?
I have no questions.
And Michelle?
No questions, thank you.
And Lynn?
No questions, thank you.
I have one question, which may lead to another one. Page 6, the pictures. When were they taken?
That's Google Street View. I'm not sure. It would have been in the last couple of years.
Oh, so it's not recent.
No, that exterior photo is a Google Map photo. That's not one that we took. That's correct.
Okay. Now just let me. So the interior photos, were they recently taken?
Yes, they were taken within the past 3 weeks.
So
Actually, I'd say within the past month, I would say.
It looks like it's used for storage for some materials.
I'm guessing that was material, I'm not sure it's storage or it's just stuff that was left behind and has remained there. But yes, there is the recycling bin certainly of sorts is being stored in there, and the other components. I don't think, in fact, I know that the owner hasn't done anything with it since the last tenant moved out in early in 2020.
Well, this is just my comment. It seems odd on page 23 that the Coca-Cola machine is still there.
Yeah, they haven't moved anything out.
Okay, that was my only question. And that concludes this matter. The next property on the docket is 344 Oak Point Highway. Just let me get there. And again, there's a preliminary issue on this property. Is that correct, Stephen?
Correct, yeah.
So if you want to read in the pertinent information and then make your request, then show
Sure.
us the
The roll number is 14100045800 Oak Point Highway. As you can see under the recommendation, we have a request for the burden of proof to be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation. So again, if we move down to my page 11, you can see the mailers that were sent out to the address. And that this is what came back. So the Canada Post did get a signature. So this building again was compliant up until 2016, but the building sold in 2017, I believe it is, or in 2018, and we have not seen a mailer for quite some time. So the mailing address and the property address are the same, so that's where we get the signature from on page 12. So yeah, this building is, or this property is not compliant.
Okay, thank you very much. Carrie, any questions?
Again, Mr. Lovenstein, the only question is, so on page 12, this is so this tracking number, this is relating to the 2020 request, is it? The one that ends in 878CA?
Yep.
But there's no indication as to the physical address that it was sent.
No, but we have that physical address. We sent it to 344 Oak Point Highway. That's the mailing address for this property. So that is where this was sent and signed for.
But that's not in your, I understand, and again, Mr. Lovenstein, don't get me wrong. I'm not casting aspersions or anything like that, but that's not in your evidence here, correct?
No, but I am giving verbal evidence to that fact.
Understood. Mr. Chairman, those are my only questions. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michelle, any questions?
No questions, thank you.
And Lynn?
No questions, thank you.
And I have no questions, so we'll take a 5-minute recess to consider.
Mr. Reimer?
I the same comments from the previous case where my concern is that the department has not provided the address to which that mailer was sent, notwithstanding the Canada Post printout, and that represents my concern as far as the onus on the department to prove that address in the context of the penalty request per Litchison. That's my only comment. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So Sally, we'll take a 5-minute recess.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Assessor, I'm putting you in the waiting room.
Thank you very much. We're reconvening the hearing for 344 Oak Point Highway for a point of clarification on the part of the assessor. So Stephen, this question is for you. Page 11, the first document says a due date of May 6, 2021, correct?
Correct.
And the second form says a due date of June 30th, 2021.
Sorry. Yeah, that's correct. Oh, due date May 6, 2021 on page 11. And I see. Okay. And then June 30th. So there's two different due dates on there. It's interesting. I haven't seen.
And the other thing is the delivery date from Canada Post on the signature slip is June 23rd, 2021, correct?
June 23rd. That's correct.
And yet the date on the notice is August 24th, 2021.
So maybe we sent it out again.
So as you can appreciate, there's some confusion over these dates.
No, that's fair. I mean, you got a few different dates. Yeah.
Okay. Sally, we're going to take another 5-minute recess and the board will reconsider the additional information. Thank you very, very much. Thank you very much.
You're live.
The panel has considered the assessor's request that the burden of proof be placed on the applicant for non-cooperation under section 53(3)(b) of the MAA and have denied that request because of inconsistent information. So, Stephen, you can proceed with your presentation.
Sure. This is for 344 Oak Point Highway. We have a actual years and effective years built ranging from 1964 to 1990. The overall year built is 1981. We have C3 zoning. The land area is 106,512 square feet. Plan area is 16,000 square feet. For the leasable area, we're at 16,156,000 square feet. I'm guessing that's due to some office space that's in there. And the land to plan is 7.28. The building was constructed in 6,000 square feet of the building, or 6,060 square feet of the building was constructed in 1964. In 1985, they added 4,000 square feet. In 1990, they added the office, which was 2,021 square feet. And then again in 1990, they also added 3,919 square feet. So those are the additions, and that's the ranges for the effective years built. My page 2, there is a sale January 8th, 2018 for $1.7 million. We never received a sales mailer, but we did review this sale. Yeah, so it was sold from the original owner to Denray Tire. They bought it under a numbered company, so that's what we know for the sale. So this property is considered on page 4, if you look, a vehicle service garage, so where they maintain vehicles. That's how we have it pucked. So it's got a leasable area of 16,156,000 square feet, and we have a rental rate of $11.41 a square foot. So if you go back up to my page 3, the 4 comparables I have there are vehicle service garages here in Winnipeg. Again, they're spread all over the city because they're not, commonly placed like in an industrial park, how industrial buildings are. So we have one in Pembina, one in Clarence, one in Portage, and one in King Edward. And you can see the rents range from $9.73 a square foot up to $16.42 a square foot. The lease starts also range from 2015 to 2019. And the leased areas range from 6,780 square feet up to 17,909 square feet. I will note that the King Edward one is the closest to the subject property. It's actually they're located on the same street. King Edward turns into Oak Point Highway at the bend, and so it's just down the street from the subject property. So back to my page 4, we have a potential rent of $184,340. We have a vacancy of 2%, expenses of 3%, and net operating income of $173,294. We're applying a capitalization rate of 8.85% to get our capitalized value of $1,958,000. So we can see on the industrial chart that this falls well out of the 20th to 80th percentile. It's quite high at 8.85%. This would be due to the type of property it is, being a vehicle service garage. Moving on to my page 8, you can see where it's located on Oak Point Highway. Again, I commented on that one comparable in King Edward. That would be right at the bend at the bottom part of the map there, so it is in close proximity to the subject property. And then on page 9, you can see an overhead view, so you can see the building itself. You can see that it has access to Oak Point Highway. You can see that there's the office part in the front, and then of course the vehicle service garage in the back. You get another view on the bottom of page 9, where you can see you can also enter the trucks through the front, or the vehicles that you're working on through the front of the property or through the front of the building. And also on my page 10, you can see you can enter through the rear as well. They're using the property to store tires. That is the business. They also have trailers on the property as well, and service trucks, it looks like, which would be the reason for the land to building ratio being so high, as they are using the property. And my computer just froze, so give me a minute. Perfect, it's back. And yeah, just my last 2 pages are the mailers, which we've already gone through. So I feel the value is fair at $1,958,000 and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Carrie, any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Just a couple. So again, Mr. Lovenstein, on your page 4, these are model-driven parameters right from the rent through to the cap rate. Is that right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Now on page 3, so these are the rent comps. These are all what I'm calling VSG or vehicle service related comparables.
That's correct, yeah.
Okay, and I think you alluded to this. The one at 1870 King Edward Street is very close to the subject.
Yeah, that's correct.
And it's also, when one looks at the leased area, it's the only one of the 4 that is close in size to the size of the subject at 16,156 square feet, correct?
Yeah, that's the closest in size, correct.
Okay. And the purchase, again, the purchase in January of 18, 1.7 million, that was from the original owner to now the owner / occupant. Were you aware that the current owner was actually a tenant in this property, leasing the entire property prior to that sale?
I don't have that in the note, but that could be true, yes.
Okay, fine. All good. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Those are my questions.
Thank you. Michelle, any questions?
Just why would the model put a higher cap rate on that property specific to that type of use?
Because it's I guess basically the depreciation will happen quicker with this type of property. It's a vehicle service garage is going to get more wear and tear than a typical storage warehouse industrial building.
Okay, and that would be the only reason?
As far as I am concerned, yes.
Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. And Lynn?
I have no questions. Thank you.
I just have one, Stephen. So this is a vehicle service garage, correct?
Correct.
So why on page 1 is the parcel use considered an industrial warehouse instead of a CMVSR?
That's a good question. That's just the way we've pucked it, I guess. It does have the higher wall heights, 70 to 20 feet. I mean, I haven't inspected the property, so I'm not too sure why it was pucked as industrial, but it is pucked as industrial.
Okay, that was my only question. Thank you very much. And Carrie, you can proceed with your presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. What you'll see in our presentation this morning is that we're coming at it by very, very different assumptions because of the nature of the asset in this case. But at the end of the day, we still come in very rough terms within sort of 12 or 13% of each other. But our valuation is fundamentally different with respect to some of the individual factors. The first factor I hope to speak to, Mr. Chairman, is the rent. So if we could turn to page 11, please. And on page 11, these are all VSG related, or the CMVSR coding, Mr. Chairman, as you alluded to it. There's a total of 5 rental indicators there. They range from a low of $6.50 up to a high of $12. So reasonably consistent with the range presented by the department, with one exception. The other point we make in roughly the middle of page 11, this was the reason for my question, Mr. Lovenstein. The owner of the property, Denray / this numbered company, it's a whole co-opco situation. Denray was actually a tenant, an arm's length tenant from the previous owner, renting the entire property at $578 a square foot under an April 2013 lease. So when they bought the property, of course, as part of sort of the sale by the previous owner to this tenant, then that lease, of course, came to an end. And so what we've done is we've defaulted to some of these market indicators. And what we're suggesting in this case, Mr. Chairman, is a net market rent of 8.25, reflecting the larger size of the property in this case. And if you turn to page 12, the 8.25 results in a total potential net market income of $132,000 per annum. That is markedly different than what the departments got through their valuation model, but it's in large part offset by some of the different assumptions we made on cap rate. So 132,000, the vacancy allowance, there is a typographical error. I apologize. The vacancy allowance should read 4% in the towards the top of page 12, not 3.5. The 4% allowance is this typical stabilized allowance we've applied for industrial and also quasi-retail properties, which the VSG would fall into, and that's the rate we've applied this morning. The shortfall rate we've applied is actually lower than the departments because we have used the industrial warehouse parameters at $385 a square foot instead of the $6 a square foot. Non-recoverable expenses, if we could ask the comments, questions be carried forward, and the capitalization rate. So this, from our perspective, this would fall into definitely the B category as opposed to some of the previous assets we've looked at that we view as very inferior. This is not. We are suggesting that it falls within that range of between 6.5 and 7.5, and we are applying 6.75% in this case, substantially lower than the model, but we believe the 6.75 is fair. This is a property it's a vehicle service garage. It's got significant size, but it's got a good land to building ratio for the storage of their tires and such that they need to do with the operation of the business. And so certainly the 6.75, we believe in fairness, is an appropriate rate to apply for the reasons set forth in the cap study. So then turn to page 13. You can see there our valuation based on the lower rent of 132,000, the vacancy at 4, lower shortfall 5 and 2 for non-recoverable and other. But again, the much lower cap rate is 6.75. We come in at a value of 1,709,000 rounded. That is reasonably consistent with the purchase by the tenant at the time of the property at 1.7 million, and we believe is a fair representation for a 2024 value. There are photos of the property. We have completed inspections. I didn't take the photos myself, but I've been in it in a prior year. These photos were taken more recently of both the exterior and the interior. And as you can see in the photographs, it's a truck primarily catering to the trucking industry. And you've got the service bays and such and the office areas that's shown in the photographs. And then finally at page 25, we've got the same breakdown Mr. Lobenstein referred to, the original building built in 64 and then additions since that time. So for all those reasons, Mr. Chairman, we request that the value for the subject be reduced to 1,709,000. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen, any questions?
I guess my only question is your rent. You're using $8.25, but your average was over $9. Can you just tell me why you didn't want to use your average?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a fair question. We looked at the size of the subject. So Mr. Chairman, could we turn back to page 11? So we looked at the size of the subject, and actually, Mr. Lobenstein, my index 3 and your King Edward least comparable in your brief are exactly the same one. So we looked at the size of the subject, but then we also considered specifically that lease rate, and it is dated somewhat. It's from April of 2013, but the lease rate at 578 certainly was a factor when I looked at it, thinking that it's no doubt the rental value would have gone north from the 578. If the tenant hadn't bought the building, what would they have renewed at? But certainly when I'm looking at that, and I'm looking sort of at a 30% uptick in the rent from the 578 between the arm's length parties in 13, I thought that was a pretty fair representation. But absolutely granted, it is lower than the average and median, applied of course with a much lower cap rate. But you're right, the average and median is higher of those comps.
Okay, that's my only question.
Thank you. And Michelle, any questions?
No question. Thank you.
Lynn, any questions?
No, no questions, Mr. Chair.
And I have no questions. So that concludes 344 Oak Point Highway, and the last property on the docket is 34 Debates. Let me just get there.
Give me 1 second here. Okay, we have 34 Debate Street. The roll number is 0609-323-1100. We have an assessed value of $6,117,000. You can see we have the years built ranging from 1994 to 2020. We have a wall height that ranges from 20 feet to 22 feet. And we have a land area of 167,846 square feet, the planned area of 51,060 square feet, and leasable area 54,156 square feet. The land to plan of 3.29. So the first building was constructed in 1994. It's 22 feet and is 15,020 square feet. The next building built in 2000 is 15,020 square feet. And is 20-foot wall height. And then in 2004, we have another addition for 5,455 square feet. And that's also 20-foot wall height as well. Moving forward onto my page 2, you can see they are compliant, and there's a very old sale in 2008, which isn't relevant to the valuation today. Going on to my page 4, we can see that we're using 54,156 square feet of leasable area applied to a model rent of $7.95 a square foot. That is supported by my page 3. So again, we're looking at similar size properties, similar wall heights, similar years built. We want recent lease starts and terms that are 3 to 6 years, as you can see. Again, for properties of this size, you kind of have to go out of the area. So we do have one on Debates, 333 Debates, which is in close proximity to the subject property. There's one 200 Discovery, Scurfield and Kenniston, which are in the south end of the city. We're looking at Notre Dame and Salto and Dougal. Dougal's again in fairly close proximity to the subject property. And Notre Dame and Salto are more in the Inkster area. We can see that the wall heights range from as low as 10 feet. That must be actually office. I can't imagine the whole building's 10. All the way up to 28 feet. And then the leasable areas are similar to the subject property, ranging from 32,000 square feet all the way up to 77,000 square feet. And again, the net rents range from $6.85 a square foot all the way up to $9.95 a square foot. So moving on to my page 4, we see the model valuation. We're applying a vacancy of 3%, expenses of 3%, the shortfall of $3.85 per square foot. So we get a net operating income of $398,840. We'll apply our 6.35% capitalization rate. We do have an additional building value of $28,000. That is the outbuilding. I'll show you in a moment. And so we have an estimated value of $6,309,000. Looking at the capitalization rate chart, you see this falls between the 20th and the 80th percentile. It also falls between all of the outside sources we have on the chart as well. So page 8, you have the map. You can see it's located on Debates there in the St. Boniface Industrial Park. Page 8, you can see that they have 2 entrances and exits where they can park or bring in trucks. The outbuilding, the $28,000 is sort of that blue roof you see out there. We've done it on cost. It's like a shed. There might be a better picture of it. Yeah, here we are. You can see it out there, the outbuilding, the blue shed. You can see also where the trucks are lined up. That's where they deposit their materials that they need for processing. And again, you can see on page 9 the parking lot they have on the east side of the building. And page 10 just gives you another look of where they back in the trucks. You can see that this is fully owner occupied in page 11. They have sent in their mailer. And yeah, so we feel the value of $6,117,000 is fair and equitable and should be confirmed. Thank you.
Thank you. Carrie, any questions?
Thanks, Mr. Chairman, just a couple. Mr. Lovenstein, with the exception of that outbuilding, the 28,000 adjustment, everything else was model driven in the valuation on page 4?
That's correct, yeah.
Okay. Turning to page 3, just briefly. So could we agree that the first comparable on debates and the last comparable on do-go, those are the only two that are in reasonably close proximity to the subject?
Yeah, I mentioned that. Yeah, they're in close proximity to the subject property.
Okay, and the Dougal Road at 77,600 is larger, but certainly the larger area here, I think the leasable is 54,156. That is larger than any of the remaining comparables, correct?
Yeah, it is. I mean, 200 Discovery is fairly close at 49,000.
Right. That's in the northwest quadrant, correct?
That's sorry, yes, northwest quadrant, yes.
Yeah. Mr. Chairman, those are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And Michelle, any questions?
Yeah, can you just clarify what is your assessed value? Is it the 6117 or is it the 6309?
Oh, that's a very good question. Okay. Well, the just give me 1 second here. Yeah, so I mean, the assessment that was appealed is 6,117,000. So that is the value that we sent out. So the value that I have in my income workup is incorrect. Give me one. So the change somehow happened within the cap rate. It should be a 6.55 cap rate, not a 6.35. My mistake.
Your mistake or the models or?
I'm looking at it right now. I'm trying to figure out it is my mistake for presenting the incorrect model number. So yeah, the difference is in the cap rate. It should be 6.55, not 6.35.
Okay, thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. And Lynn?
No questions, thank you.
I just have one question. Stephen, page 9 is a photo of one side of the building. And
Yep.
it appears to be, is there a mezzanine on the top floor? Because there's windows on top of one another.
I have not inspected the building. I couldn't say. It could be a mezzanine, but I have seen industrial buildings that do have windows that high to allow light in as well.
Okay, fair enough. That was my only question. And Carrie, you can proceed with your presentation.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. To answer that question, actually, that would be office mezzanine. Looking at the department's brief on page 1, if you note, the plan area is 51,060, but the leasable area is 54,156. So that is that second floor mezz space. So you're exactly right. As it turns out, with the correction to the valuation that Mr. Lovenstein advised at 6.55%, we've now narrowed the issues even further. The remaining issues are actually net rent, which we're not far apart on, and non-recoverables. So if I could ask the board and Mr. Lovenstein to turn to our page 11, please, of the main submission. And what you see on page 11 is a series of leases right in this area, very close area, ranging from a low of $6 a square foot up to a high of $8.25 a square foot. Leases negotiated from 2017 all the way through to February of 21 for larger premises. A lot of them are quite a bit smaller than the subject, but certainly I was focusing on the rental. The rental information actually in the immediate area was actually fairly robust, and these comparables reflect the rents for the various sizes, and based upon that, with the average and median, but then accounting for the larger size of the subject, but also it is a good quality property. The age is newer. The land to building ratio is very good, as you can see from aerial. They've got a separate parking area on the one side. They've got the loading on the other, so it is well set up. And so we settled on a potential net market rent based on all of that information of $7.75 a square foot. So on page 13, then, you can see with the application of the 775, we are continuing to apply the stabilized 4% vacancy allowance pretty much across the board for these kind of properties, absent a specific site-specific issue like we'd seen with the lower quality stuff earlier. That's not the case here. So we applied the 4%, 385 shortfall, the 5% non-recoverables for the reasons we've suggested previously, and actually a cap rate of 6.5%, which, as it turns out, is just a tick lower than the departments. And so certainly at the 6.5%, we believe this property warrants a cap rate in that range. It is newer, good quality, and the 6.5% certainly stands to reason, in our opinion. We're also valuing that same outbuilding at $28,000. We take no issue with that valuation. So the final value, including that outbuilding, is at $5,665,000, and we ask the board to order accordingly. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Stephen, any questions?
Just on your page 11, I'm just looking at all your debate comparables. Are these warehouses, or are they similar to the property, or are they storage warehouses?
These would be considered mostly storage warehouses, not manufacturing. They're all
Okay.
with the M1, with the M1 and M2 zoning, as we show there. Yeah.
Okay, so they don't have over like 20% office space or anything like that. I only ask because there's just so many of them. I just wonder if they're more of the flex warehouse type, not the manufacturing.
And to be clear, Mr. Lovenstein, your question's a good one. I can't give precise percentages, but certainly my experience in that area is you'd have office finish of between 15 to 25%, but I don't believe any of them are either much lower or much higher than that. They fall within that range.
Okay, those are all my questions.
Thank you very much. Michelle, any questions?
What is the use of the property?
It's plastics manufacturing, so they're essentially manufacturing plastic products for the market.
Thank you. No other questions.
Thank you. And Lynn?
I have no questions. Thank you.
And I have no questions. So that concludes 4 debates. We have heard all the items scheduled today, and this hearing is now adjourned. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank
all for
you.
your time.
Thank you.